Bell is rung, but no tardy passes. You just get your seats. Fine. Take your time. Glad to see you today. We're going to keep going with our class that we've been working on. Doesn't seem possible, maybe it does to you, that we're about 3 weeks or so from the end. So with our gospel meeting beginning at the end of September, we only have a few more classes left. So trying to condense and get what we need to as far as the important things, and then it'll be done. So I hope it's been beneficial to you. I hope it's been something that has been interesting at the very least, and something that you can use if you need to. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll begin with our class today. Father, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for the blessings of life, for those who have made it safely. We're thankful for the time that we have to study, and we pray that it would be of good use to us. We pray that you bless us in all we do, especially next hour. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. Like I've said, and like I've told several of you before, and will do this to those who have asked, these will all be available to you if you need them or know someone who would like them, and I certainly don't hoard these things and keep them to myself. So they're quite large as far as files, so I'll have to send them separately, but they are yours if you would like to have them, or if you can determine what I mean by certain things, you might have to translate some of the things that you see on here that we're doing. But this has been our theme verse. Again, we try to just go back just to remind ourselves, Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 and 5. Today we're looking at the Hasmonean dynasty and the beginning of Rome's influence in the area. And we are looking at that phrase, the fullness of time, in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. As I've said before, my smallest hope is that after this class, whenever you're reading through the book of Galatians and you come upon this phrase here, you will stop for just a split second and appreciate that phrase, because there's a lot that went into that, the thousands of years in order to bring Jesus to this earth, and we're only looking at just a small sample in this class. We have to hit the highlights because of time. But we have been looking at Daniel chapter 2 as well as other chapters in Daniel for an outline and for the prophecies that are there, and we've looked at the statue. We are going to continue for the first time in a few weeks. We're going to go to the next medal in this list today. And so we started in Daniel chapter 2. We started with the Babylonians, or in the 600s. They are the ones who took over after the Assyrian Empire. And then we moved on to the Persians, and they are around 530, the late 500 BC. And then we've spent several weeks looking at Greece, because they have a lot of influence and a lot of things that they added to the time period that we're more concerned with, which is the New Testament, the first century. And we'll finish up with this section today, what we're calling Greece, and then we'll look at the next one in line after that. So we'll start, and that's hopefully where we will get to today. So we've been here at the belly and thighs of brass, and we've been looking at Greece. Now, it has several different names, different formations. We started with Alexander the Great, who was pushing his empire to the east, but then he dies at a very early age, and his empire has been split into different pieces, and a couple of those pieces were warring against each other, and we noticed several times here in the past that Judea was kind of caught in the middle. Last time we were together, we looked a good bit at Antiochus, who was the ruler here in Judea during this time period, and his zealousness, I suppose, for wanting to Greekify or Hellenize the area caused a revolt, especially here in the area that we'll call Judea. And we noticed that last time, especially this man here that we talked about. His name is Mattathias. He is from the tribe of Levi. He is a priest, and he was there in the town of Moda'in. And when a representative of the ruler of Antiochus tried to get him to offer some animal to one of the Greek gods, because they were trying to force Greek religion onto the people, he kills that individual, and from that point starts a revolution. Kind of think of it like, I don't know, American history, Lexington and Concord, the first shots of the revolution. So this would be not the first shot heard around the world, but it's the spark. It's that beginning time where there's no going back, really, for his family at least. And he brings a lot of people with him. We have this drawing from the 1800s of his preaching to the people that they needed to get behind him. If you are of the Lord, if you are believers in God, then you need to follow me into this revolt. So he, and you can tell by those pictures, though they're obviously not at the time, but he was quite old in age. But his sons were also priests, and they were also they were adults, and they were able to carry on the work because he wasn't alive much longer after he started. But he had 5 sons who were all going to have a part in this rebellion, and after the rebellion is over, most of his sons take part in being one of the rulers of this new kingdom that they're going to create here, as we'll notice today. And so these 5 sons that he had, John, Simon, Judas, Eliezer, and Jonathan, revolt against what was called then the Seleucid Empire. That was the section of the old Greek empire that existed at the time. And so these individuals were the ones that were kind of the leaders here, and they eventually drive out the Seleucids, or at least from Jerusalem anyway, and they're able to, we noticed this last time, but they're able to reinstitute and dedicate the temple again because it had been desecrated because of Antiochus's actions there with pigs and other things. And in John 10, verse 22, again, we've noticed this last time, that Jesus celebrated a feast that was commemorating that event. And so we kind of have some of those things happening even in the first century. And so this spark of this revolt, after his death, Antiochus, we've talked about that as well, the Seleucids were forced to make peace. And this was on the edge of their empire. And as we're going to see today, this is kind of the beginning of the end of this. It is an empire, but not in the sense that it belongs on the statue. It's still part of the old Greek empire, and they are losing their influence, they're losing their power, and another one is rising in their place. But in the meantime, Judea enters a short period of independence, about 80 years or so. And so it is technically possible for someone to have lived through the entire period of independence here that Judea enjoys, and we're going to see that today. Keep in mind, and you have to keep reminding. I have to keep reminding myself of this when you look at history. We sometimes think of these empires as having a beginning date and an end date, and then the next one comes along and has a beginning date that's exactly the same as the end, and then it goes forward, and there's this beautiful line, and each one is in order. But that's not how these things happen. Of course, these nations, these people, these empires rise and fall alongside each other. And so because of the way we present material, we have to start somewhere, and then we have to go back and look at another group, and we'll get into them as well. But while all this is happening, there are other things going on around the Mediterranean. We're going to look at Rome today. They've been in kind of the background as far as we're concerned, and we're going to see them a lot more prevalent in the years to come. But for this time period, while one empire is kind of ebbing away and another one is coming into existence, they have this short window of independence, which is going to do a great deal for what they desire of a Messiah later on. Hopefully I'll explain what I mean as we get towards the end. But this revolt itself is called the Maccabean Revolt. I'll show you in a moment, but the word Maccabees is probably the nickname of one of Mattathias' sons, which means the hammer. And so his family's revolt here is the Maccabean Revolt, and this secures their independence for a little time. And from that revolt begins something called the Hasmonean dynasty, or the Hasmonean. It's not really an empire, but you can call that if you would like. And they rise to power as a result of this Seleucid departure. And I know I say a lot of names and things like that, but we're going to talk now about the Hasmoneans, because they are an important part that is going to set a base for something that happens in the New Testament, and I'll show you that at the end. So the Hasmoneans here. I use words like Maccabees and Hasmoneans, and maybe this is the first time you've heard these names. They can be confusing because sometimes they are interchangeable, and to a degree they are the same people. So what do I mean when I use these names? Well, when we talk about the revolt, the Mattathias and his sons revolting against the Seleucids, we use the word Maccabee because this is a specific family. It's not their last name, but it might be like your specific family, you and your children and their children, that little group there that might have a revolt. That's who this is talking about. And more than likely, this is what most people think, it's because one of his sons, the Judas, is named Judas Maccabee, and that's a nickname that means the hammer. That's a pretty cool nickname. And so that's an Aramaic word, and later is transliterated into Greek. And so there's a pretty good evidence that that was his name. But while I was looking at this, while I was researching this, I found that there are other people who have a different idea, which I think is pretty interesting. And one of the things that frustrates people about the study of history is that sometimes a lot of times you get to a point where you can say, whichever idea you like, go with it. We don't know for sure. And so do you think this is it? Okay. Do you like this idea? Then okay. And we can't ever come to a consensus on it, and that frustrates people. But that's the nature of the study. Now, some have a different idea of where this name Maccabee comes from. They think it actually comes from an acronym of a verse in the Old Testament. If we were to take the Exodus 15, verse 11 here, who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Now, here's where a translation of a text is not really going to help us understand, the ideas that they're talking about here. But if we were to take this verse and we were to look at it in the Aramaic here, my Aramaic is terrible, but if the four words that are here, if we were to take the first four letters of those words there, who is like you among the gods, O Lord, and we were to take those four letters and we were to put them side by side, we have this word, without most of the vowels anyway, Maccabee. And so some people think that who is like you among the gods, O Lord, in Aramaic is, if we could take the acrostic there, becomes the word Maccabee. And if this is true, then the word Maccabee would be more like a battle cry. Remember the Alamo, or things like that. And so it would have been something that the people said, and they were, who is like you among the gods, O Lord? And they're shouting this as they are rebelling or claiming independence from these Greek gods, from the Seleucid Empire that's there. I think that's pretty interesting, though I think more people think it's just a nickname for the guy, which is fine as well. But I thought I'd bring that out because you can kind of see what the people were intending at the time, using those. They would do that a lot. They'd use the acronyms for different things from verses and say the word, and it just meant the entire verse that it was referencing. So there's something there, maybe. Now, the Maccabee is the nickname, and when I say Hasmonean, I mean something that is that encompasses a lot more, goes back further. The Maccabees are a particular family, a father and his 5 sons, and the revolt that they started, the Hasmoneans would be that family plus all the others that have been in the past. So you might have a nickname that refers to you and your children, but if you use your last name, you're talking about not just that group, but all the ones before you, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. And so it's a bigger group. So Maccabees is the more specific people, and the Hasmoneans is a larger family group inside of that priestly family that was there in Moda'in. The Hasmoneans were all of those priests who belonged to that family. They loved lineages and being able to trace their ancestry back to Abraham. And so this is that group that's there. And so they're the ones that are going to come to power. My father or my grandfather was one of the ones who fought in that rebellion. Therefore, I can take over and I can be one of the rulers here. And so the Hasmoneans, they trace their lineage back to a priest named Hasmon, and that's where the name comes from. And so we talk about Hasmoneans. That's usually after the rebellion has calmed down and they are ruling on themselves. Hasmoneans are the family line. Maccabees are the rebels who led the revolt. I started talking about that last week, and I realized that might be confusing for some people, so I thought I might define it very quickly. Any questions or comments there? Let's look at these Hasmoneans. So the revolt is over, and because the Seleucids were unable to put it down, they had to make peace. And so Judea, the southern part really of Israel, is now more or less independent. And so these sons of Mattathias start to rule for a short time. That one of them would die and the next one would take over. We were the leaders of the revolt, therefore we should be the leaders of the new country that exists. So you have like, for example, in our history, American history, the ones who were leading the revolt are usually the ones who were, at the very least, were elected to national office, whether it was George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or some of these others as well. So because they led the revolt, they were seen as able to lead the country after. So that's what happens here. So these Hasmoneans start to rule. One of them, Judas Maccabee, would rule for a time. After his death, his brother Jonathan would take over. After Jonathan, then we have Simon, and that gets the ball rolling. And so down through these generations, 3 or 4 generations, they continue to rule. It's during the reign of Simon here, about 142, so we're 142 years or so before Jesus. This is the time when they officially receive recognition of independence, not only from the Seleucids who had control of the area, but also the Ptolemies in Egypt and some of the other surrounding areas. So this was a pivotal moment because it's like, you can go to your house today and say, all of this land is a independent country. I am my own country. That's not how that works. Other countries have to recognize, yes, you are your own country, or you are an independent country, and we will treat you as such. So here we have the people of Judea for the first time since probably the Assyrians, or Babylon at least, so 500 years or so, there is an independent people made up of the Jews or the Israelite people that exists here for a short time. Again, it's about 80 years, so it's a little time, but we have them achieving independence. I keep hinting at what I'm going to tell you, so I'll go ahead and mention it a little bit. But when Jesus comes to the earth, the people here in Israel, in Judea, in this area, are looking for a Messiah. They're looking for someone that will drive out the Romans. They're looking for someone who will build another kingdom here on this earth, because not too long before this, they had a kingdom of their own. And their grandparents, perhaps, or great-grandparents were alive during that time. And the Romans are the ones who ended it, as we'll see, and they're wanting it back. And so we have this desire for not a spiritual Messiah, not a spiritual kingdom, but an earthly one. And Jesus is not that. And so they said, well, let's move on to something else. And so this kind of lays the groundwork for their attitude in the New Testament, and why so few are willing to follow him, because he's not what they're looking for. They're looking for someone with the nickname Hammer. They're looking for someone who is going to put to death the Romans and drive them out. This is their history, and he doesn't fit what they think the kingdom is supposed to be. And so that's the idea that I want you to take from these people here. Their independence, as is often the case, is a blessing and a curse. The Hasmoneans, of course, coming from Mattathias and his family, they are priests. So they are from the tribe of Levi here, and they are combining the role of priest and high priest, but also king and military leader. And so they are used to, or at least they have in their history, this idea of a priest and a king and a military leader. And when Jesus comes, they're going to learn that he is those things. He is the priest. He is a king. He is a leader of his people against the foes, against their enemies, but not in the way that they think. Because Mattathias was a high priest after the order of Levi. Jesus is a high priest and a king after the order of, Hebrews is going to tell us, Melchizedek. So he's not the same thing that they had in their past. And their military leader, he's got to be on a horse, and he's got to be driving out the Romans. Jesus comes in riding on a donkey and not wanting to drive out anybody, because that was not his mission. And so for nearly a century, the Jews grow accustomed to this setup. Our leader is our high priest, and he is our king, and he is our military leader if other countries try to come and take our land. And so this is what kind of gets ingrained to them, and they really like it. And so it's a blessing because they're independent, but it's a curse because they start looking at their leader in the wrong way. Because it's not, a high priest from Levi and a king from Judah. It's both of them combined together. And that's something that is going to be a detriment to their feelings and their attitudes later on in the first century. Some of the strength that this new dynasty brings to the table here. They restore that Jewish independence. For the first time, I said, like in 500 years, there is an independent Jewish state, as states existed at the time, right here, and it's been restored. The Hasmoneans, more specifically the Maccabees, restored the temple worship, and once it had been desecrated. And so now not only do they have a temple to worship God in, but their king is the priest who was going to offer the sacrifices for them in that temple. And so that's a strength for them as far as their perception is concerned. And it's going to inspire future generations. The term Maccabee, whether it's from that acrostic or whether it's the nickname of that man, it becomes a rallying cry even during the time of the Romans. This area is, it was volatile during the Roman Empire. In the year 70, we're talking like 30 years after Jesus, 30, 40 years after Jesus, Rome is so sick of all the rebellion in Judea that they come and wipe Jerusalem off the map, at least the temple and most of the stuff in the city, because they are constantly trying to rebel, unlike lots of other places in the Roman Empire. And part of that is because of these Hasmoneans. They were so excited for this independence that it inspires these future generations to say, they did it, we can as well. And so, you have even people today, we look back on our history, American history of this rebellious spirit, and we like to think that we are the inheritors of that kind of spirit. That's how they were, and in a much more violent time than we are. So they certainly had some strengths about them, at least as far as they were concerned. Now, their weaknesses, they had irregular leadership. If I am both a priest and a king, it's going to be really difficult to find the balance between those two. I can either focus more on being the priesthood, the spiritual leader of the people, or I can focus on the kingship or the kingly part of it. And this is where the temptation comes in. When I think of this, I think of how wise it was for God to have the priests be of one tribe and the kings that they had be of another tribe. Why didn't he just do like most of the world, the nations around them, and say, well, your priest is your king? Because there's a temptation to focus on one and let the other one slip. And that's what happens here to the Hasmoneans, because most of them started focusing more on the physical, the political side, and letting the spiritual side slip. I knew that was going to happen. And they become increasingly worldly. We let the temple worship, we let the spiritual side go away, and we focus on making ourselves like the nations round about us. And so the Hasmonean, they become very much like those other people, because look at us, we're an independent country, we have to act like it. We've got to have our palaces, and we've got to have our military, and we let the spiritual side go. And that's what seems to happen here. They become increasingly power-driven as we get closer to the time of the Romans. And interestingly, it plants the seeds for some internal division. If you are a person living at this time, you're going to have strong feelings for which way that king is focusing. If he's focusing more on the kingly side, if you like that power, if you like the idea of you being, our nation is like many others, but we're better, then you're going to approve of that. But if you think he should be focusing more on the spiritual side, when he's worried about the political stuff, it's going to upset you. And you're going to say, hey, we should come back this way, and we should go back to our roots. We should be more conservative in that respect. And so there starts to develop this fissure, this division between people groups, and you are very familiar with the names of some of these groups that are starting to divide. I'll show you their names here in a moment. As we get to the end of this 80-year period, these later Hasmonean rulers become far more political than spiritual. And as all nations do, they start to ally themselves with foreign powers, and that opens the door for their undoing. The priesthood here is it became more of a political appointment. Yes, I'm going to be the king, but I'm naming myself as the high priest as well. Or maybe I can let someone do it for a time, but he doesn't really care about it because it makes him a lot of money. That's all he wants it for. They rule for nearly a century until a particular family strife ends independence. There was a man named Alexander, and this is his wife Salome. And Alexander was one of the last Hasmonean rulers. He was a king and a priest. Well, he dies, and his wife here takes over as the queen, but she cannot be a priest. And so she names, as she's the queen, she names her oldest son, Hyrcanus, John Hyrcanus II, as the priest. So I, Salome, I'm the queen, and you can be the priest, And then when I die, you'll just step up into that role and you'll be both king and priest again. When she dies, however, his brother, his younger brother, Aristobulus II, says, I don't think he deserves it. He's not very strong politically. And so he can be the priest, but I think I should be the king. So we need to have a divided empire here where I'm the king and he's the priest, and it's not exist in the same person. Because who says that the oldest has to be these things? I'm the better one. I'm the better brother. I should be the king, because that's what he was more focused on. So we have this strife going on between these two brothers, and of course they have their supporters. They have their own personal guards, their own personal military units, and they start a civil war beginning, this is 67, so we're about 60, 70 years or so before Jesus. These two brothers start to fight, and their forces start to fight each other. There is the civil war that goes on here, and those supporters that I mentioned a few moments ago are going to really come to the forefront. And they're going to be the ones who are fighting, but also the ones who are very supporting, very supportful of their the one that they're going for. Hyrcanus, that's the older brother who was the rightful ruler, was backed by a conservative group. So this is the group that they are going to support him because they think he represents a more traditional role where he is the priest and the king. And that's what we've had for, 60, 70 years, and that's what we should have. And so this more traditional, more conservative group, we're going to see them later, and I'll tell you where they come from. But they're the Pharisees, and they are his supporters. Now, Aristobulus is backed by a liberal group that is more focused on the physical realm, the political realm, and, as is often the case, the wealthy. This group is called the Sadducees. And so they are focused on priestly power, not because they're focused on spiritual things, but because the priestly power is kind of what opens the door for the other side, the political realm. And so these two groups, there are others that belong here, but there starts to be this fissure, this cracking of society, where we have one group on the far right for in their perspective, so the Pharisees, and then we have those on the more on the left side, the Sadducees. And so it's this civil war 70 years or so before Jesus where they start fighting. Sometimes when we read the New Testament, we see the Pharisees and Sadducees together, and we think, well, they're just, they get along to whatever, and they're usually in agreement. They used to kill each other in a civil war, okay? They were very much opposed to each other because one supported a rightful ruler and another one supported what they thought was a usurper who wanted just political power for himself. But it's when Jesus shows up and he's not the king that either of them wants that they band together, they get him out of the way, and then they can go back to their squabbling. And so it's the civil war that's in the background. It's the foundation for their animosity towards each other. But the fact that we don't really think of them as enemies should be a testament to how much they dislike Jesus. That phrase, the enemy of your enemy is your friend kind of thing. Well, the Sadducees liked Jesus as little as the Pharisees did, and so for the time of the New Testament, they were together. This is in the background, and this was definitely part of their history, and it's one of the reasons why that division starts to begin here with this king and priest Hasmonean dynasty that's there. Sometimes I talk quick. Well, I do always talk quickly, but anything that I need to repeat or clear up for you there or we need to mention before I move on. This is 67 to 63. Remember, we're counting down. That's how the years go here, BC. For about 4 years, they have this civil war, and neither gets the upper hand. They want to be in control in Jerusalem. That's where the temple is. One of them wants to be the priest and king. The other wants to be a king and a priest in that order. And they realize that they cannot tear the kingdom away from the other one. And so, as many would do, they look to another power. They look to someone else outside of their kingdom and say, hey, if you can loan me some men, if you can give me some money, I will put down my brother, and then I'll pay you some tribute. I'll pay back the loan, that sort of thing. And it doesn't go as they think it's going to, as is often the case when we have grand ideas. There's another power that's here in the Mediterranean that has been going on for hundreds of years. We'll talk more about them next week, but we're going to look today at the legs of iron. And the legs of iron are the Roman Republic. We'll see when we get there, but the feet are iron and clay. So there's the same material, but it's got a weakness that's going on through it. That's the Roman Empire. But the Roman Republic is these legs of iron. This is one of the, we've mentioned them before, but this is really the first time that they intervene in what we call Judea. So the Roman Republic, the city of Rome, the Roman Empire, all of this, of course, it's bigger than life and many of us in our imagination, but they have been in existence for about 750 years. They've just been over there in Italy, and they start to gain influence and grow bigger and bigger. And by about 63 or so, at this time period, they have now advanced. They're not an empire yet, but they are gathering a lot of land into their influence as a republic. And they have now made it over to the eastern part of the Mediterranean, over where Judea is. This Maccabean revolt against the Seleucids signals the end of that Seleucid empire. They start to lose ground in lots of places. When the American Revolution, I keep going back to that, but when the American Revolution takes place and we break away from the British Empire, it takes about another 100 years or so, but the British Empire, that's kind of the signal of they're on their way out. I know they get much larger in the 1800s, but there was a weakness that was there that the American Revolution kind of signaled maybe the British Empire is on its way out, and it took a little while to get to that point. But this is kind of the beginning of the end for them. And as empires crumble and start to lose ground, others kind of go in and fill the vacuum. And the Hasmoneans were just a little part of that, but then there's always a bigger fish. And here's the Romans who enter in. This is a picture of the map at the time. Again, we've seen this area before, but that's Turkey in the middle. Judea, the Hasmonean kingdom, is down here at the bottom, where we see that right there. And this is the pieces of what was the Seleucid Empire and some of the other pieces of the Greek Empire. And each color is a different people group. And so for most of these people, this would be a great time because they were independent, they had their own kingdom, but then in comes Rome, and now that we're all separated and independent, they can pick them off one by one. And that's what seems to happen here. The Hasmoneans, you see them down in the bottom of the screen. That lighter blue color is all that's left of the so-called Seleucid Empire. So they've lost all kinds of influence, they've lost all kinds of power, and Rome just fills that vacuum, the Roman Republic anyway. Now the crumbling Seleucids here, they attract the growing power that is Rome from the west. That's going to be on the left side of that map over there. And Rome here is set to conquer a lot of area even before they become an empire. And they add the Seleucid pieces, which, if I can go back to that screen, you see they're after that lighter blue area, the Seleucid, if I have right here. They're after this area. I don't even know if you can see that red dot. I don't know why I use it. That's what they're after. But the Hasmoneans, and they're having that civil war between those two brothers, are to the south. And so both of these brothers send word to Syria, and they ask the Romans for help. In 63 BC, there happens to be a Roman general named Pompey. He's going to become famous as trying to fight against Julius Caesar later on, and Augustus. And he was in Syria at the time, and he received a letter and messengers from both of these brothers, Aristobulus and Hyrcanus. And both of them said, will you come and help me win this civil war? Pompey is a very shrewd general and leader. If it were not for a man named Julius Caesar, he would be the guy that we talk about as far as, great generals, and he would be the one they named their kings after and all of that. So Pompey comes to mediate the end of the war. And instead of sitting down with both of them and saying, okay, what are your complaints and what's your claims? And then he decides who's going to be the victor, which is what they wanted to happen. He just marches to Jerusalem and he surrounds it. And he besieges the city for about 3 months before finally being able to enter. He marches in, goes into the temple, walks into the Holy of Holy place, which again desecrates the temple because we have a Gentile Roman who is now in the temple. And in essence, he kind of takes over. And so these two brothers are hoping to get the guy on their side. He actually takes over himself because he looks at both of their situations and he says, the stronger one is the younger brother. Aristobulus has more money. He has more people on his side. He has a better claim to the throne. So I'm going to side with the weaker one because the weaker one doesn't have as much money and he's easier to manipulate, and I can put him in charge or someone else, and he's not going to cause as much trouble as the other guy. Very shrewd, this Pompey is. So he sides with the one who is not as strong. Now he allows Hyrcanus to remain in the role of high priest. Remember the first guy, he said, I should be king and priest. And the Roman general here says, no, you're going to be the priest, and I'm going to give the authority of king, and I'm going to give it to someone else that I can control, or that Rome, the Roman Senate, can control. And so while Rome was busy putting down all of these other smaller groups, they didn't have time to mess with Judea, the Hasmoneans, but he put someone in control that Rome could tell him what to do. And it wasn't Hyrcanus, and it wasn't Aristobulus. The red area here on the map is the Roman holdings at about this time, and the blue area is what's left of that Hasmonean kingdom, and up here is where the Romans were. This is where Pompey was, in that area a little bit north of here. But he goes and takes the red area, and then he controls in a very Roman way the blue area. And we'll talk more about this next week. But here in the southern part, this is south of Jerusalem, south of Judea, is a place called Idumea. This is formerly called Edom in the Old Testament. It's the people there consider themselves to be from the tribe from the family of Esau, and so the Edomites and the Idumeans is what they're called here. So these people belong to the Judean realm, but it's here that Pompey finds a leader that he can put in charge, because he's not Hasmonean, he's not a Maccabee, he's not a Jew, but he is from the area. And so he puts him in charge, and he calls him a procurator. Procurator is from two Latin words that mean to care on behalf of. And so this is the end of the Hasmonean Empire or dynasty, and someone that's not a Hasmonean or a Jew is put on the throne, and he tells them, you're taking care of this area for us in Rome. We now control it. You're going to send us taxes and all of that, but we're going to put you in charge as long as you do what we say. And because he chose a very good person to do that, there was not a lot of problems, at least for a time. So this is a procurator, and this procurator is the one who is appointed by the Romans. They govern the province, they collect taxes, they maintain order, and as long as they're doing all of those things, Rome is happy. This is the Roman way of doing things. We're going to put someone from the area who knows the language, he knows the people, he knows the traditions, and he knows how to manipulate people. And as long as that guy is doing his job, Rome's happy, because they get to sit back and collect taxes and conquer other lands. And so this is basically a financial or administrative overseer. So for about 60 years, there is a procurator in Judea. And that continues to be the case when we get to the New Testament. Here in Matthew 27, verse 2, and there are other times when he's called this, but we read of this man called Pilate, and the King James calls him the governor. That word should probably better be translated the procurator. This is what Pilate is. He is he's in the line, or the appointed line anyway, of that very first one. He's the Roman man who is kind of in charge, and he is Rome's representative here in the area. And so it's because of this civil war that happened about 65 years before Jesus that it allowed Rome to kind of come in and say, you know what, we're going to take over. I like this place. And so we're going to put someone in charge. And then when we get to the time of Jesus, the Romans have completely taken over to the point where they have this governor here, even who's over a guy who calls himself the king. And we're going to see him in just a moment. So that word governor, procurator, he's the representative of Rome. But the Romans choose someone from the Idumeans, and his name is Antipater. And Antipater is, again, an Idumean, so he's from Judea area, but he's not a Jew. He's just kind of in this administrative district. But he knows the people, he has good connections, he can rule well, and he shook the right hands in the process here. There were some good reasons why Antipater was a good choice. He had local influence. Think if Pompey had brought someone in from, I don't know, Greece or somewhere else and say, hey, you run this place. Would have had no idea how to do it. Doesn't know the language, doesn't know the traditions. So he has local influence already. He's from nearby Edom. He had shown himself during the Civil War, he showed that he had good political and military skill in that Hasmonean conflict. A lot of times in order to survive, you just had to know the right hands to shake, the right rings to kiss, and you'd survive. He does that. He picks the right side in this conflict here. He openly supported the Roman interests. Oh, here come we should go and ask the Romans for help. He promised loyalty and tribute. If you take over the Romans, then I'll pay you lots of taxes, lots of tribute. I'm a loyal Roman guy. And he organizes the tax collectors. He appoints a number of people to key positions. And this Antipater, he appoints his sons to key positions. And one of those sons is a man named Herod. So this is with the entering of Herod. About 40 or so BC, we see this family really start to come on the scene to where we get to the first century. And there's this guy named Herod who has come of age, and he is a king in one way of speaking, but the Romans are still in charge. But it's because of this Antipater. He continues to build his influence. He puts his son in charge. And now we have this man Herod. And of course, we'll talk more about him later. But that's where he comes from when you see his name in the New Testament. Continuing through the New Testament, his family is going to be there. As we get to the end, our first bell is already rung. But Rome takes advantage of this weakened Hasmonean kingdom. Hyrcanus is now made the high priest. Antipater is made the procurator, the authority here in the area, and this took the true power away from the Hasmoneans. Sure, you can go ahead and be a high priest, but you have no authority anymore as far as politics are concerned, so it strips the power away from them, and it gives it to Rome. And this is seen by the Jews as kind of I don't know if stealing's the right word, but you took that from us. We had it for 80 years, and if it hadn't have been for a family squabble, then we'd still have it today. And so 60 years or so before Jesus, they had that independence in their minds taken from them. And so for over a generation, the people had been looking for someone that can fix the problem. We had it. It was there in our hands, and we just dropped it for a second. If we can find someone who can put it back in our hands, well, then we will get behind that guy. And Jesus is not the first person to be called the Messiah. They called John Hyrcanus the Messiah. They called the Maccabees the Messiahs. They were the deliverers. They were the anointed ones. And when their kingdom was lost, they looked for another. Remember when John the Baptist sent his followers to Jesus when he was in prison and asked him, "Are you the Messiah, or do we seek another?" John had the right idea of who the Messiah was, but he wanted to make sure Jesus was in fact that one. There were lots of people who claimed to be the Messiah, trying to get people on board here. We're going to drive the Romans out. We're going to do this or that. And Jesus was not the one that most people thought he should be. And that's one of the reasons why they pushed so hard for his being taken out. They felt the kingdom had been taken from them, the Jews did, and they sought a Messiah that would be a priest and a king, just like the Hasmoneans had been. Jesus was a priest and a king. He is a priest and a king, but not in the way that they thought. So in John 8, verse 32, it's interesting. Jesus says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." I find their response hilarious, but when you think about the Hasmoneans, this is what they have in mind. The truth will set you free. They said that we are Abraham's seed, and we have never been in bondage to any man. How shall you say we shall be made free? Well, for about 80 years, that was true. But all the other time, they were in bondage to someone. There were Romans walking the streets of Jerusalem who were technically in control. And so notice where their mind is. We're free because the kingdom used to be ours, and it's been taken for a time, but as soon as we can find the right guy, we're going to drive him out, and we'll be free once again. And so that's where their mind is. It's kind of stuck in the past, and it's stuck on that Civil War, and it's stuck on that time of independence that they had. Again, when it was evident that Jesus was not going to drive out the Romans, when it was clear that he was not going to do what they thought he was going to do, many rejected him, and they started to seek another. Even there at his trial, when he was talking to Pilate, the procurator, the governor here of Judea, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, the Hasmoneans, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from hence. That's the phrase that got everybody's attention. That's the one that said, it's not who he is, so we need to look for someone else. Hopefully some of this will kind of help us understand their minds as they do the things that they do in the New Testament. That is our class there. Anything else before I know we're done. But all right, thank you so much. Appreciate your attention today.